For 20 years, he'd been quietly working with the deceased, never talking about his past, never mentioning why he examined every body with such meticulous care, until artificial intelligence discovered he was a former forensic pathologist and that he'd been silently identifying murders disguised as natural deaths. Welcome to AI Human Stories. This is a story about death, deception, and the thin line between natural causes and something far more sinister. Riverside Funeral Home in Salem, Oregon, had served the community for 40 years. Dignified, respectful, the kind of place where families felt their loved ones were treated with honor. David Walsh had been the director for 20 years, 58 years old, soft-spoken, with the practiced empathy that families needed during their darkest hours. He guided them through arrangements with patience and care, making an impossible process just slightly more bearable. Mr. Walsh has a gift, families would say. He makes you feel like your loved one matters. What they didn't know was that David paid attention to details most funeral directors never noticed: the way a body presented, lividity patterns, rigor mortis progression, small inconsistencies between stated cause of death and physical evidence. Professional habit, he'd say if anyone commented on his thoroughness during preparation, want to make sure everything's right for the viewing. But David's attention went beyond professional pride. He kept detailed private notes, photographs that weren't for the family albums, observations that had nothing to do with funeral arrangements. In his office, hidden behind files of sympathy cards and service programs, David maintained records that would have looked more appropriate in a medical examiner's office than a funeral home, because David Walsh hadn't always been a funeral director, and some habits from his previous life were impossible to break. Dr. Lisa Chen was a medical resident at Salem Hospital, rotating through the coroner's office, young, ambitious, with the sharp eye of someone who hadn't yet learned to miss things in the name of efficiency. She'd been reviewing death certificates when something bothered her. Over the past 5 years, Salem had seen an unusual number of elderly deaths from natural causes: heart attacks, strokes, respiratory failures. Nothing individually suspicious, but the pattern was statistically odd. Elderly people die, her supervisor said. That's what happens in retirement communities. But Lisa couldn't shake it. The deaths clustered in specific nursing homes and assisted living facilities, all handled by the same funeral home, Riverside. She decided to meet the funeral director, purely professional courtesy, just to understand the process better. David welcomed her visit, showed her the facility, explained their procedures, answered her questions with the patience of someone who understood the medical profession. "You're very knowledgeable about post-mortem presentation," Lisa observed. "Most funeral directors I've met don't understand lividity patterns. You pick things up," David said carefully. But Lisa noticed more. The way David discussed bodies wasn't cosmetic, it was clinical. He used medical terminology that funeral directors rarely knew, spoke about post-mortem intervals and decomposition rates with scientific precision. "Mr. Walsh, where did you train? Your knowledge seems extensive." David's expression shifted slightly. "Long story, different career path before the..." Salem Hospital had implemented an AI mortality analysis system to identify potential public health trends and medical quality issues. The program analyzed death certificates, autopsy reports, and statistical patterns across the region. Dr. Chen, still bothered by the death cluster, ran the elderly mortality data through the AI system. She included nursing home locations, funeral home records, and death certificate details. What the AI found was disturbing. The system identified a statistically significant cluster of elderly deaths over 5 years. The pattern showed deaths that were individually unremarkable, but collectively suspicious, all from different causes, all certified as natural, all processed through Riverside Funeral Home. But here's what caught the AI's attention. David Walsh's background check revealed he was Dr. David Walsh, former chief medical examiner for Multnomah County. He'd resigned abruptly 20 years ago, with no public explanation. The AI had also found something else. David had been filing anonymous reports with the state medical board, detailed observations about specific deaths, questioning official causes, suggesting further investigation. Reports that had been largely ignored as coming from an unverified source. Lisa brought her findings to the county medical examiner. "David Walsh is a legend in forensic pathology," the examiner said, looking at the file. "Brilliant pathologist, left the field suddenly. We assumed burnout. Why would a forensic pathologist become a funeral director? Maybe he couldn't handle the living anymore. Or maybe," the examiner paused, "maybe he found another way to do the work. Lisa approached David carefully. If he'd been identifying suspicious deaths for 20 years, there were reasons he'd chosen to work quietly rather than officially. "Dr. Walsh," she said, using his old title deliberately, "I need to talk to you about the death cluster." David didn't deny his background. "You ran the AI analysis. It found your reports. 20 years of flagged deaths, all ignored." David was quiet for a moment, then gestured to his private office. Inside, away from staff and families, he opened a locked filing cabinet. Dozens of case files, each one a death he'd prepared for burial, each one with detailed forensic observations, photographs, toxicology concerns. "When I was ME, I saw everything through the lens of suspicious death," David explained. "After 20 years, I couldn't turn it off. Every natural death looked potentially unnatural. Every accident might be homicide. It destroyed my objectivity." "So you quit?" "I quit before I ruined innocent lives with false suspicions, but I couldn't stop seeing what I was trained to see." David pulled out a specific file. "This was 3 years ago. Elderly woman, died in her sleep at Meadowbrook Assisted Living. Death certificate said heart attack, but when I prepared her body, I found petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes. Subtle, but there. Asphyxiation," Lisa breathed. "Potentially. Could have been from the heart attack itself, or from a pillow held over her face until she stopped struggling. I reported it. Nobody followed up. How many like this? 17 over 20 years, all elderly, all in care facilities, all certified as natural causes, all with small details that bothered me." Lisa looked through the files. The documentation was meticulous, professional, exactly what you'd expect from a trained forensic pathologist. "Why didn't you go public? Contact the FBI. You have evidence." David's expression hardened. "Because I've been wrong before. Spectacularly wrong. I've accused people of murder who were innocent. I've put families through hell based on suspicious findings that turned out to be nothing. That's why I left the ME's office. But if people are being murdered, that's the problem, Dr. Chen. I see suspicious patterns everywhere. The AI sees statistical anomalies. But neither of us can prove murder without proper autopsies, and you can't order autopsies based on a funeral director's gut feeling and an algorithm's statistics." Lisa and David worked together quietly. They needed more than suspicions and patterns. They needed evidence. Using David's detailed records and the AI's pattern analysis, they identified commonalities. 13 of the 17 suspicious deaths shared a specific characteristic. All had been cared for by rotating staff at multiple nursing facilities contracted through the same healthcare staffing agency. The AI cross-referenced staffing schedules with death dates. One name appeared at 15 of the 17 deaths: Carol Henderson, a registered nurse who'd worked at various facilities over 2 decades. "She could just be unlucky," Lisa said. "Working with elderly patients, you're going to see a lot of deaths." "Not this concentrated," David noted. "And look at this." He pulled up his photographic documentation. 3 different victims, 3 different facilities, 2 years apart. All have similar bruising patterns on their upper arms. Faint, easy to miss, consistent with restraint. During end-of-life care, restraint bruising isn't unusual. It is when the death is sudden and unexpected. These weren't people in their final days. They were relatively healthy elderly individuals who died suddenly in their sleep. Lisa ran Henderson's name through hospital records. Nothing suspicious. Excellent performance reviews. No complaints. But when they examined the AI's broader data, they found something chilling. Henderson's patient mortality rate was 340% higher than the nursing average. Over 20 years, she'd been present for 47 elderly deaths across 6 different facilities. Not all suspicious, but statistically impossible if purely coincidental. With David's forensic documentation and the AI's statistical analysis, Lisa convinced the medical examiner to order exhumations on 3 of the most suspicious cases. The autopsies revealed what David had suspected but couldn't prove: traces of potassium chloride in tissue samples. In therapeutic doses, it's a necessary electrolyte. In high doses, it causes fatal arrhythmias that mimic natural heart attacks. "Angel of death," the investigator said, "healthcare worker who kills patients. We see it every few years." Henderson was arrested quietly. Her apartment contained detailed journals documenting her mercy missions, killing elderly patients she determined were suffering unnecessarily. The trial was swift. Henderson showed no remorse. She believed she was ending suffering, making difficult decisions that families couldn't make. 47 murders over 20 years. Most would never have been discovered without David's meticulous documentation and the AI's pattern recognition. "You saved lives," Lisa told David after the verdict. "By identifying the pattern, we stopped her from killing again." "I documented deaths," David corrected. "For 20 years, people died while I took notes and wondered if I was crazy. That's not saving lives." After Henderson's conviction, the county offered to reinstate David as medical examiner. Full position, full authority, recognition for the work he'd done. David declined. "I can't go back to seeing suspicious death everywhere I look," he told Lisa. "That's what destroyed me the first time. I need the boundary between my professional skepticism and people's real grief." "But you're wasted as a funeral director. Your skills are being used exactly right," David interrupted. "I provide dignity to the deceased and comfort to families. And if something looks wrong, I document it. But I don't let suspicion consume me anymore." But David did agree to consult. He developed protocols for funeral directors nationwide, teaching them to recognize signs of suspicious death that might warrant further investigation. His forensic background combined with his funeral experience made him uniquely qualified to train others. "Most funeral directors never learn to see what I see," David explained. "They're taught to prepare and present, not question. I'm teaching them to pay attention without becoming paranoid." The AI system was expanded, monitoring mortality patterns nationwide, identifying statistical anomalies that might indicate serial killers in healthcare settings. "Henderson wasn't the first, and won't be the last," the investigator noted. "But now we have tools to find them faster." 6 months after Henderson's conviction, David received an anonymous letter. No return address, postmarked from Seattle. Inside was a single photograph, an elderly man clearly deceased, with subtle markings David recognized immediately, and a handwritten note. "Natural causes, like all the others." The letter was untraceable, but David knew what it meant. Henderson wasn't working alone, or there was another one, someone who knew David was watching, who was taunting him with evidence of deaths he couldn't prove were murders. David sat in his office, surrounded by decades of documentation, and realized the pattern was bigger than Henderson. The AI had found one killer, but the statistical anomalies extended beyond her cases. He pulled up his files, started cross-referencing again, this time looking not at Henderson's pattern, but at the gaps, deaths that didn't fit her profile but still bothered him. Another pattern emerged. Different facilities, different regions, different years, but the same subtle signs David had learned to recognize. "Dr. Chen," he called, "I need you to run another AI analysis." "David, Henderson's case is closed. Henderson's case is closed. This is something else." Lisa heard something in his voice. 20 years of controlled suspicion finally finding its target. "How many more do you think there are?" David looked at his files. Decades of deaths that bothered him, patterns he'd dismissed as paranoia. "I don't know, but I'm not crazy, and I'm not stopping." David Walsh still works at Riverside Funeral Home, still treats every deceased person with dignity and respect, still comforts families through their grief, but now he works with a network. Funeral directors trained to recognize signs, medical examiners willing to listen, AI systems monitoring patterns, a quiet system designed to catch what official channels miss, because the truth about death is simple. Most of it is natural, but some of it isn't, and someone needs to pay attention to the difference. The question isn't whether David was right to spend 20 years documenting suspicious deaths. The question is how many killers are still out there, hiding behind the assumption that old people just die, and how many more victims will there be before someone else starts paying attention. This is AI Human Stories. Sometimes the truth is buried with the dead. If this story made you think differently about the people we trust with our most vulnerable, share it. Subscribe for more stories where technology helps us see what we've been trained to ignore. Stay vigilant out there.